Is Chapter 18 the perfect endgame map in Fire Emblem Engage? So one thing you'll commonly hear is people will complain about the endgame in FE Engage. And I don't blame them, because a lot of the endgame maps tend to spam reinforcements. However, Chapter 18 just puts you in a surrounded position and then gradually pushes you on multiple fronts, and then it's up to you, the player, to figure out how to dismantle this position or just skip it entirely by sending 2 people over to kill the boss, which is also an option. So let's break down what this map does and what it's all about, and why I think it's one of the best endgame maps. So first of all, it doesn't have tons of reinforcements. It has one set of 4 flyers that reinforce the left ship after around like 6 to 10 turns, somewhere around there. And they're not really the hardest thing to deal with. And if you have archers or units that just have bows, you know, from like Lynn, from like Lucina, it's really not that bad to deal with them. But let's just pass the first turn just to like see what happens. See how the map pushes you. So it's kind of like a tower defense map, but at least it's like deliberate. Some of the endgame maps pretend to not be tower defense maps, but they actually are tower defense maps. So like Chapter 21 and Chapter 22 are kill the boss. Well, Chapter 22 is like collect the emblem rings, but it's basically a kill the boss map in a way where you're like pushing through the map, getting all these emblem rings, and then, you know, routing the map. It's a route map. And the Chapter 21 objective is to kill Vale, essentially, but the map kind of treats it like a tower defense map early on by just spamming you with reinforcements, instead of just having enemies placed on the map so you can see where they're at and where they're coming from and how much distance and time you have. I feel like if they're going to do a map that attacks you, like if they're going to do it well, you should be able to see most of the enemies before they push you, because otherwise you have to memorize patterns for spawning, which is like counterintuitive and isn't really like enjoyable. So on the opening turn, these swords push you, this archer pushes you, this archer pushes you, the axe pushes you, these armors push, and this armor pushes. Now on the opening turn, you can kill a lot of these with your opening moves, so you can kind of like stall them out. And obviously there's builds and tactics to hold fronts and chokes, but I feel like this is one of the better maps because it has choke points. It has placed spawn, placed spawn, so you can see where the enemies are actually coming from. It has finite, limited reinforcements. The map itself, even with a good team, is generally difficult. It's not like impossible, but it's usually like a good challenge, especially if you're using new builds that you haven't tested before. These flyers push you in 2s, so like I think these aggro next alongside these. So the more proactive you are, the easier the map is, and also the better enemy phasing you can do, the easier the map is. You can of course also skip the map. So if you want to play quickly, if you want to beat the map in like 1 to 2 turns, you can also do that. So it has low reinforcements, it has deliberate enemy positioning, it has sequenced staggered pushing by the enemies so that you can actually deal with the threats of the enemies and not have like 50 things attacking you at once. It allows you to determine where you want to fight the enemies and how immediately. It also gives you a tool to directly stagger groups of enemies in lanes. So if we view the map in terms of like traffic, there's 4 docks, or not docks, 4 like planks that enemies can cross, and you can manually just shut one down by using the cannon that has 5 uses. Honestly, this is like one of the best maps in the game, I think. It has utility on the map, it has good enemy placement, you can be super aggressive on it, you can attack the map, you can determine what choke points you're holding. One thing I commonly do is stick a unit down like here to fight these early. Like I usually try to aggro the flyers early, and that's like a strategy I use. Now of course you can do things like, you know, Smoke Thief or Bonded Shield, but the nice thing about that for this map is even if you Bonded Shield, your Bonded Shield can't be at all 4 planks, right? Now what you could do is put them like in the middle of 2, and then put your team on the other side. That's one thing you can do. Also, there's these sieges. So if you get too aggressive, if you want to like dive a ship, you have to take out these sieges, because these plus an enemy usually will kill. So there's other threats that are sitting in wait, but it's not like obnoxious. Like Chapter 21 has these 2 Thoron mages that spawn twice in a row, so that if you don't kill them quickly enough, you're dealing with 4 Thoron mages. This map just has Linden on Thoron and some other units on like Elfire. But essentially, the map is actually designed in a way that encourages, you know, variety of play. Like there's not just like one solution that you should always use to beat this map. There's many ways you can take it on. And for that reason, I think it's a really good map, because I always play it a little differently every playthrough, even though I have like basic tactics that I use. So let's go back to the beginning. So let's do like an example opening turn with this team. All right, so right out of the gate, we have an archer with 21 speed, so I could send Tamara to enemy phase that. It's javelin. All right, so we have that. We have another archer.
Tell me where.
Let's see, 27 defense. All right, so that she'll take damage. So Jade can go for a tomahawk here. I don't know how much damage she's gonna take. She's gonna take quite a bit. she needs like gentility or something. We have this armor. I can stick Pandrea over there. Now 2 things will hit him, so I can chain guard him.
How mysterious.
So like your opening turn, usually the success will be determined by how aggressive your initial enemy phasing or player phasing is. And of course you can do things like Astra Storm one of these early. So I can Astra Storm that early.
Watch this! I need to get stronger until no one can beat me.
Until no one can beat me. Let's see, for Ivy, she can enemy phase that. She is quite slow right now. And who else?
My turn.
Just kind of move some people in a little bit. Usually I try to pull as many things as possible. Now I'm gonna get hit by that lance, so I don't want to do this yet. Alright, we'll just pass here. This is just an example. So Ivy puts that almost at half. This is a base Ivy. She hasn't been used this playthrough, so she's not going to be very good. She's Lindworm level 1. So here's the Tamara. Alright, so she almost kills that archer with a javelin. Then the Jade. So we start off with some enemies damaged, maybe some enemies killed. And Amber can pull this. Now this definitely isn't one of my most aggressive versions of this opening, but we were able to damage a bunch of things and get them low, so that sets us up for future kills. But you can see like just how the map kind of just like slow pushes you, but at least you know like, okay, they come in waves, you see the waves, it's communicated to the player what's happening, and it's also intentionally like a tower defense map. Like it's not like a kill the boss map that forces you on your back foot, which is most endgame maps. Like chapter 21, 22, 23 all attack you with tons of reinforcements that just keep coming. Chapter 24 is also like that, but at least it has like a time limit, so you can only like give so many turns. Chapter 25 and 26 are notorious for reinforcement spam. If you don't beat chapter 26 fast enough, the game just starts spawning in 8 things a turn, so good luck dealing with that. And for chapter 25, the reinforcements do end, but they're not really explained, and they just kind of keep coming. So I would say, like, of the endgame maps, this is probably one of the best. Now, chapter 19 isn't a bad endgame map, but I would say it's kind of like the beginning of the endgame shenanigans that people get tired of, where there's just like a ton of enemies, and you're just like stuck in a position. Which is fine, because I guess, like, it's... You know, it's basically another tower defense map. I feel like the problem with the end game is really the pacing and the delivery of objectives, like what you're dealing with, like how you actually play the game. It's not very enjoyable to go from tower defense map to 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 rushing the boss and killing it. Like there's no flow to that. It's just like 6 stages of just tower defense back to back. There's no, like, I don't know, seize objective map. Like, you could argue chapter 22 is this, but chapter 22, you really get punished if you're super aggressive unless you know exactly what you're doing and you've tested specific strategies on specific units and you have like some kind of LTC game plan. But chapter 22 spawns a bunch of enemies and slows you down immensely, and then starts spawning 3 enemies a turn with the sole purpose of slowing you down. So this notion that the endgame maps are kind of like, you know, boring or tedious or repetitive, I think is accurate. I don't think it's just people complaining to complain. I think it's like legitimately a thing. There's no sense of like you are the player attacking things. Like even in Doom Eternal, there are enemies that don't chase you so that you can run up to them and attack them to give you a feeling of not being, you know, not constantly retreating every 5 seconds. And in Engage, the end game, really it should be like a rush. Like you should be like rushing through to kill things. Now chapter 24 does kind of mix it up because you have to be fast, but it still does spam enemy reinforcements, and it also slows you down with its terrain. So of the endgame maps, I think 24 is one of the best. Like out of like the near, like, you know, almost completing the game endgame maps, this is like an early endgame map. I would say this is like the beginning of the endgame, maybe chapter 17 is. Some people consider chapter 17 the beginning of the endgame. Chapter 17 is okay. It's definitely not as good as this map. This map is just like a good battle, I think. It's not cheap, there's no gimmicks, you clearly see all the enemies on the map. The only thing you really need to know is which of these flyer squads pushes you first, because otherwise you can assume most other enemies are going to push you. You can see what the reinforcements are, so you can see that there's axe units coming, so I shouldn't put like a lance unit on this side long term. Like I would rotate Tamara out for someone else, and this side has sword units. So you can like plan for weapon breaks, you can plan for weapon triangle, you know, shenanigans. You can avoid getting broken yourself. This side is also very mage heavy, so there's like quite a few mages. This side has some early mages too. And it also has a magical siege, whereas this side has, or no, they both have magical siege. But yeah, they both have magical siege. For some reason I thought one was an archer. Weirdly, they're magic instead of like ballistas, but whatever. So yeah, I think this is a good map. I think it's one of the best maps. I do think Engage has like an endgame map problem, and it's not going to be addressed really. It's just what we have. Some of the middle game maps are much better, but they're also easier. But it would be nice if there was more variety in the objectives in endgame maps, because like chapter 21 through 26 outside of 24 all feel very samey, where you're just like on your back foot defending unless you're warp skipping or playing like, it's either you're slow pushing and it takes forever, or you're skipping it in 5 minutes. Like there's very little in between. Like you could be running broken builds and maybe it takes you 30 minutes to an hour. That's fine. Like that's probably where we're at now with like well builds. But it's not like enjoyable to just deal with spam reinforcements. Like this this opening position is like something to solve. It's not just like, oh, just stick a unit here and they kill everything. Now you could do that with certain setups like Bondage Shield, but you can't do that on all 4 fronts. And you could also consider these to be like secondary fronts where these flyers fly in. So there's a lot of positioning that you can't just rely on just a single, you know, Bondage Shield or broken unit, unless you just undeploy everyone. Which I guess you could do in theory. Just undeploy everyone except for Alir. If Alir's your bonder, just do that. But that's it for this one. I just want to talk about one of my favorite endgame maps. So yeah, definitely like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think the good endgame maps are. I'm curious to see what people think about these endgame maps. I know most people just warp skip them because, like, you know, no one wants to deal with the infinite reinforcements, because it's a lot of times it's not even a challenge. It's just like busy work. Like, oh, kill these 50 enemies. It's like, all right. All right, so that's it for this one. Peace.